Negotiation is part of living. We do it all the time. I mean, you think about it when you walk down a crowded street even. You negotiate which path you take. A couple negotiates their relationship before and during the marriage. And although you might not realise it's happening, you're doing it all the time at home. You know, who's taking out the garbage tonight? Who's going to do the dishes? But of course, negotiation is one of the skills developed by all savvy property investors. Over the years, I've noticed some people are very good at getting terrific deals. Most others simply get what the other party's willing to give them. So what's the difference? Well, in my mind, the first group knows how to negotiate. When I realised that all life's a negotiation, I decided to become good at it, and in my book, Negotiate, Influence, Persuade, I wanted to help others become persuasive negotiators. As I said, life's one big bargaining event, and if you become a good negotiator, it makes a huge difference to the quality of your life. If you're a poor negotiator, you're going to spend a fortune. If you're a good negotiator, you'll save a fortune. And if you're a great negotiator, you'll make a fortune. But as I started to write my latest book on negotiation, I realised that to be successful, you actually need to be more than a negotiator in life today. You need to be able to communicate with people. You need to create rapport to understand how to ethically influence and persuade them. Now, recently I was interviewed by Jackson Milan, the wealth mentor, about negotiation for his podcast, and I was impressed with the insightful questions he asked. So I actually asked him, could I please share his podcast with you, my audience? And that's what today's show is. Jackson Milan interviewing me about how to become a power negotiator. So enjoy today's show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
G'day guys, this is Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, and we're here for another episode of the Financial Freedom Secrets Show. Now, I'm very excited for today. I'm more excited than usual because I have a new friend of mine, Michael Yardney, that I have been stalking for a very, very long time. I am not ashamed to say that, Michael. For those who don't know you, you've been and haven't invested for over 5 decades. And you bring a rare perspective to the property market commentary, and that's the reason why you've been voted one of Australia's 50 most influential thought leaders. Michael is actually a #1 best-selling author of 9 books, and he frequently challenges traditional financial advice with innovative ideas of property investment, personal finance, and wealth creation. And while he's known as a property expert, he's also one of Australia's leading experts in the psychology of success when it comes to wealth creation and financial freedom. He's personally worked and mentored over 2,500 business people, investors and entrepreneurs over the last decade, and is probably educated more successful property investors than anyone else in Australia. He writes regular columns for Yahoo Finance, Smart Company, Your Investment Property Magazine, New Zealand Property Investor Magazine, and Your Mortgage. Has been voted Australia's leading property investment advisor and has had 5 other similar awards over the last 7 years. He's also the creator of the world's best property blog, propertyupdate.com.au, which I do read almost daily. So, Michael, without any further ado, mate, I appreciate you making the time. How's things?
That sounds very impressive. I've got something to live up to today now, Jackson.
That's it, mate. Your reputation precedes you. But I'm looking forward to sharing some value, mate. Michael, what I want to talk about today is you're a veteran of this space. You've done this for over 5 decades. So first things first, mate, when you look back on your career in business and investing, what do you think have been the cornerstones of your success that you can attribute to being able to persevere through changing markets, changing tides for such a long time?
That's interesting, Jackson, because I've actually never thought about that. It's just I've had to do what I've had to do. But over the time, I think I've learned that some people are more successful, whether it's in business, in property, in other areas, and it has to do with their psychology. In the past, I thought it had to do with their knowledge, or maybe they came from a wealthy household. But we've seen some very successful people come from poor backgrounds, which I did. I think somewhere along the way, I developed the psychology of successful people. And then once I started studying other successful people, realizing I couldn't do it on my own. And when I started getting mentors around me, that took me to the next level. So in business, I've had business coaches, just like you have. I'm part of mastermind groups still today at the age of 70, still wanting to learn. So I've been a voracious learner, but I've also been prepared to ask questions, have people around me, set big goals, and learn what others have done successfully. And rather than reinvent the wheel, emulate them, Jackson.
Yes, I love that, mate. Success leaves clues, right? And there are many successful people out there that leave those clues. And what I've come to realize, Michael, for a very long time from a mindset standpoint, I thought these very successful people would actually keep all of these secrets very closely guarded. And some of the most successful people that I've ever met, yourself included, you're so generous with that knowledge and imparting that wisdom and that experience. It's not as hard as you might think to get access to all that information as long as you ask the right questions, right?
Well, in the past, it used to be hard. When I first started investing, there weren't blogs, there weren't podcasts, there weren't videos. In fact, there was one or two property books in Australia. I came from a poor background, but my friends' parents were rich. They had businesses and they invested in real estate. And my parents' friends were rich. My parents' friends were my friends' parents, I guess. And I saw what they did, and most of them invested in real estate. Also, I saw a lot of estate agents when I was young, driving big cars. In those days, in the 60s, they were what we used to call the Yank tanks. They weren't the European BMWs and Mercedes. It was the big Cadillacs. And I thought those people must be rich. So I wanted to be like them. And then I learned what they were doing and how they started to do things. And I soon realized it actually wasn't the estate agents that were wealthy. It was the people they were working for that they were wealthy. And the estate agents was just a pretense of wealth.
It makes a lot of sense, mate. You've got to own the assets if you're going to have the big bucks, not just taking a clip on the ticket. But one of the things I really wanted to focus on in our conversation today, Michael, is based on one of your books, and How to Be a Power Negotiator. In my experience, I've been involved in the wealth and business space for over 15 years now, which is a blip on the radar in the grand scheme of things compared to yourself. But I've come to understand the power of negotiation. And you need to negotiate everything. You've got to negotiate deals of acquisitions. If you're going to acquire real estate, you've got to be a good negotiator. If you're going to convince people to work with you, partner with you, everything is about negotiation. So in your book, you actually say life is one big negotiation. What do you mean by that, mate?
Well, I think in life, you're always negotiating in subtle ways. Sometimes it's really obvious. You want to get the best car deal. Sometimes it's as simple as you want to get the best table at the restaurant. At home, it's who takes the rubbish out tonight, or what are we going to watch on TV tonight. So life is one big bargaining event. Either you become a good negotiator or not. And if you do, it actually does make a difference to the quality of your life.
Yes, I agree with that, mate. And it's interesting. I prefer the term negotiation because I think other people use sales. And I think sales has a lot of negative connotations. And I think negotiation probably doesn't have as many negative connotations. And it's just such an important skill to learn. But so many people are passengers in that negotiation process. So, mate, who do you think really needs to learn how to negotiate?
Well, interestingly, just following on what you said, my publisher said, Michael, you've been involved in over $5 billion worth of property transactions. That's B with them. And he said, you should write a book on negotiation. And as I started doing that, I have fun writing. As you said, I've written 9 books. That's amazing from somebody who genuinely almost failed high school English. I wasn't a good reader, and I'm still not a particularly good reader. But as I started writing this, it's more than negotiation, as you were starting to hint at. It's also persuasion. It's also influence, because negotiation has a sort of give and take element to it. So this book was, the publisher initially wanted it about real estate and maybe making it for salespeople, but no, it's actually more for consumers because we all negotiate every day with our life, with our boss, with our children, our work colleagues, the customers, the clients. And while there are plenty of books that teach sales techniques, negotiation techniques, I wanted to do something different. Again, coming to the psychology of why these techniques work. And I know that you and your team work a lot on the psychology of success and so psychology of wealth. And similarly here, I wanted to help readers understand. So it's more than negotiation. It's about persuasion, influencing that I think comes across not just in business, but in all areas with family and friends. But it's not a nasty thing. It really just depends upon what your intent is. So there's a lot of information there, which I believe is very powerful. And you can either use it for good, or I guess you can sort of use it for evil to take advantage of people. And I really hope people don't do that.
No, I agree with that, mate. And it's interesting. It takes the energy that you put into it, right? If you look at it as it being dirty or manipulative, then that's what it's going to be, right? Whereas if you see that a negotiation is just about getting everyone what they want. Like I'm a big believer in the triple win, right? And if I'm looking to do a partnership, I want to win. I want the other party to win and I want the client to win. And everyone can win in that negotiation. But it's interesting. I spend a lot of time on social media. One of my guilty habits is TikTok. And there's actually a lot of American creators on there that film their negotiations. And the throwaway line that I've always loved that Americans use is, how about we meet in the middle, right? How many times have you heard that before, Michael?
Yeah.
But what's interesting in your book, you have a different philosophy of not necessarily meeting in the middle, not necessarily having this give and take philosophy. So what's your approach that might be a little bit contrary to that, mate?
Well, it depends what you're talking about. So if you're negotiating on buying an ice cream, if it's a one-off deal or a small thing like that, you don't argue, you don't complain with what the price is. If it's something where you're wanting to build a relationship, like you were talking about with colleagues, with business associates, with clients, with long-standing, ongoing client relationships, then yes, I think the concept of a win-win works very nicely. Let's be blunt. For most of us, we want to win. We don't want the other person to have the upper hand. And so for one-off negotiations, I think it's important that you feel that you've come out ahead. If you meet in the middle, I'm suggesting maybe there's a property that's worth $1 million and you only want to pay $900,000. People would say start at $800,000 and you'd sort of meet in the middle at 900. But you'd often find that's not the case. You offer 800 and they come back with 975 and say you go up a bit more and they go, and you end up actually not really halfway at the halfway mark. So maybe it's better to say, what do you want out of the negotiation? Understand that it's a process. Again, not if it's a one-off quick purchase, but if it's a bigger deal, you've got to know where you want to end up. You've got to know what your highest and best price you're prepared to pay. In property, which is an area I'm involved in, for example, and you're going to an auction this weekend, what you'd want to know is, okay, what would I really like to get the property for? And that's usually below what the second price is of, hey, what's it really worth? And of course, you'd like to get a bit better than that. And then the next price would be, well, what am I prepared to go up to? So if on Monday morning when I read the results in the paper, I'm not angry, I'm not cross that somebody else got it. So again, before you go into a negotiation, in my mind, you should really know where you want to end up. Do your homework, do your research, and that will then very much influence how you handle it and treat it a bit like a game, and whether you really are interested in meeting in the middle, if that suits your purposes, Jackson.
Makes sense. So we really need this strategy, and I've been guilty of this myself. I'm guilty of going in and just winging it and seeing what happens and dealing with it as it comes. But having that forethought of the plan, the strategy of the kind of the layers of success, but getting a really great deal or sometimes maybe making some adjustments so you don't end up losing out and regretting it. I think it's a really great philosophy, mate. So I'm definitely going to take some
Australians
pages out of
aren't
that.
brought up to be good negotiators, Jackson.
No.
It almost goes against the grain of Australian culture. However, it's very different for people who grew up in Asia or even the Middle East. So I think it's important to understand the principles of negotiation and influence, because over the years I've seen many, many people being taken advantage of by, in my area, by property brokers, but by car salespeople, by all sorts of salespeople, because they're trained negotiators. Their job is to learn how to be a negotiator and pick your weak spots.
Yes. And I think it's so important, right? Like the way that I look at it is if you're playing, say, a board game and you haven't read the rule book, and let's say we're sitting down and we're going through it, and then as you make a move, you go, oh, no, you can't do that. That's breaking the rules. You have to do it this way. And after a while, you're going to get frustrated. And you need to understand the rules if you're going to be able to play the game, particularly if you want to play it to win. So in your book, you talk about that there's 27 rules for negotiation. Now, I'm sure we're not going to cover them all off, but could you give us some of the most important or valuable rules that the listeners could take away and start implementing in their own negotiations?
Okay. Well, I guess there's a couple of things to understand, because there are some areas in negotiation where you have more power. I guess I'd call them leverage points, Jackson, in your negotiation. So these aren't even the rules, but every time you negotiate, I seem to feel either you're in control or you're not comfortable and the other person's got the upper hand. Of course, it's nice to have that feeling of power. So where are you getting the power from? One is time power. I think it's important to understand that if you're not in a hurry, you've got the upper hand, but the lack of time is actually putting you at quite some disadvantage. And you'll see that often in negotiations, that people put deadlines, the Black Friday deals, it's got to be available today for 24 hours. Or in property, it's the auction, you've got to make the deal at 10 a.m. next Saturday morning on site there. So deadlines are a form of negotiation power that the other side has on you. But I think it's probably also worth remembering, Jackson, that other people, somebody set that deadline, so they can actually be flexible, they can be extended. So one area of power I think you need to understand when you go in is having time power. I think the other is information power. Again, it depends upon the complexity of the negotiation. But in general, the more information you've got, in general, the more power you're going to possess. Knowing more than the other person you're negotiating with is very powerful in major negotiations. So do your homework. And I think the other power, the other leverage point negotiators try and have on their side is alternative options. The more options you've got, the more power you possess. Again, in my area, in property and real estate, if that is the ideal home and that's the home you want for you, your family, and there's nothing else on the market, and you fall emotionally in love with it, you're not going to be able to negotiate sensibly. So if you've got a number of options, if there's others down the street that are similar, you'll go into the negotiation, Jackson, but you're not going to be taken advantage of. So they're not even any of the rules just yet, but I think it's important to understand how you get power on your side to start with.
For sure. It's interesting. As soon as you're talking about those, I'm reflecting back on negotiations that I've been a party to where somebody who has been obviously an experienced negotiator has literally used all three of those things against me. And when you understand that, you go, okay, wow. Okay. I could have seen that coming. How could I have better used time? How could I have better used the information? How could I have better used other alternative options? And look, I think this is challenging for me, particularly because I have ADHD, Michael, and I hyperfixate on things. So if I want something, I want it yesterday. I get very emotionally and deeply invested quickly. And I don't want to consider other options because I want to get it done and dusted. And this is the reason why I would never buy a property without a buyer's agent. I know that I get caught up and someone is going to smell the blood in the water, so to speak. And if I don't have somebody like you in my corner who's able to, exactly right, I really am. So if I don't have someone like you in my corner who can be that objective intermediary and use those things to help me get the best possible outcome, I'm in trouble. And I've just said this publicly on the podcast. So guys, please don't take advantage. How common is that, mate?
Okay, so you asked me about some rules. Maybe one I should mention is that everything's negotiable. That doesn't actually mean you're always going to win every negotiation or you're always going to be able to negotiate. But you must remember that almost all things are potentially up for negotiation. And the other rule I'd try and remind people of is, I hinted at it before, know what you want before you go in. That way, because as you said with your ADHD and you're wanting things quickly, and I'm not sure that I have got it, even though I've often thought about it. I get emotional still. I want things straight away. I've learned the concept of delayed gratification, but I still find it hard. But I actually plan big negotiations. It's like when you're planning a holiday, you work out your final destination, where you want to get to, and then work backwards and decide how you want to get there. Because in negotiation, I guess like in life, if you don't have a plan of your own, you're going to be part of somebody else's plan. And the other thing I think it's probably worth remembering is treat it like a game. Don't take it too seriously. You should be involved, but not that much. If you're too emotionally involved, you lose perspective and make emotional rather than subjective decisions. And that's hard, whether it's a new car, new clothes. You like the idea of looking pretty. Like all games, you've got to understand the rules. Skilled negotiators understand the structure and the order of things. If you play the game, don't know the rules, as you said a minute ago, you don't even know when the game's begun. You don't know when you reach the midpoint and the near conclusion. Maybe one of the other points is you're probably not old enough. Did you ever watch the TV show Columbo, Jackson? Columbo was when I was your age, I guess, or younger, he was on TV and he was a detective. He was disheveled. He wore a crumpled raincoat and he was always in a fog in his mind. He was a very smart detective and he always sounded like he didn't know what's going on. And so therefore he managed to, I guess, get under the skin of the criminals he was getting for as a detective, because people weren't scared by him. So rather than being overly smart and saying to the estate agent, oh, I've done my research and this house isn't worth that much there, or this one sold at that price and that one sold at that price, come and say, look, I'm not very good at this. I don't buy properties very often. How did you come to that conclusion? How did the vendor decide that price? Please help me make my decision. And you'll find people are more prepared and willing and open to help you. Now, don't believe everything people tell you, of course. You actually go into this game of negotiation better if you act a bit dumb like Columbo did.
Great advice. I love it, mate. That's fantastic. Yeah, I think one of the common parts of a negotiation and a common saying that you hear a lot is a quick sale is a good sale. We work with a lot of business owners, and I think the two biggest events that they're going to have in their life and their career is potentially going to be a business sale at some point in the future, or the sale of a property asset if they need to reach some sort of liquidity event. Do you believe a quick sale is a good sale? Should we be trying to take the first offer that's presented? How do we approach that with that fear of the deal going stale and potentially missing an opportunity? What's your philosophy on that, Michael?
Okay. Well, you mentioned two separate things, businesses and properties. So a lot of business owners have a long-term goal of selling their business, whether it's to others in the business, to private equity. Very occasionally you're going to float on the stock exchange. That's where, as part of a negotiation, it's a long-term game, isn't it? So you make the plans a long time ahead. And so therefore you've got a better understanding of what's going on with what we said a moment ago, that you've got to understand the various stages of a negotiation. So you set yourself up accordingly. It has a lot to do, Jackson, with what I mentioned a moment ago about how many options you've got. What are the alternatives? How urgent is this? So those time pressures of option, time, or those not time pressures, but the pressures of time, options and knowledge are going to come into play there. So if it's a business, how many other potential parties are there? I'm not sure a quick sale is a good sale, but you shouldn't, in general, aim for the last cent, because sometimes you are going to miss out. If the other person has options and you hold out for the best price, you may find out you're not going to have a buyer at all. Now, that's very much what happened in real estate in 2022 when the market slowed down. Go back to 2020, 21 in a booming property market. Yeah, you could hold out for a better offer because people kept coming into the market and were prepared to pay almost anything because emotion played the part when FOMO, fear of missing out, kicked in. And that's starting to show up again now where people are realizing we're getting close to the peak of interest rates. Inflation is coming under control. So eventually the market's going to move. And in fact, they've realized that in many parts of Australia, the property market started moving in February this year. So there's 3, 4, 5 months, depending upon who you look at and which markets of the market moving up. So fear of missing out is starting to come in again a bit. And buyers can't be silly. We see people go to auction every weekend. They miss out for $5,000. Then they're back in the market next week, but competing with the other 5 people who missed out, and the next property is going up in price a bit. On the other hand, vendors can hold out. So a quick sale is a good sale. Depends if you're buying or selling, and very, very much upon the market conditions.
It's really interesting, mate. I actually think it was I don't know if it was a video or it was a post of yours on the Property Update blog. But when you think back to, say, our parents who bought property in, say, the 80s when interest rates were 20%, when they recount that, they always say, I bought my property for 30 grand or for 50 grand or whatever it was. But you never hear them say, I wish I negotiated an extra $5,000 off the purchase, right? It's a blip on the radar in the grand scheme of things. And I see so many people sweating the small stuff. And I think this comes into the negotiation. They sweat the small stuff, which is it ends up being insignificant when compounded over a 10, 15, 20-year period of time.
In fact, it's more important to buy the right asset, because if you negotiate well and you get it cheaper, that's a one-off hit. Beautiful. It feels good. But if you buy the cheap property, where in the current property market, there's a shortage of A-grade homes and investment-grade properties. So you're not going to get a bargain anymore. It's still cheaper than it was 12 months ago, but you're going to have to compete against other people. If you're getting a bargain, I'd actually be wondering why. What's wrong with this? What don't I see that others do? So rather than taking the one-off advantage, I would rather get the best asset, the quality asset that's going to improve. So just in line with what you said, I bought my first investment property in 1971. Went halves with my parents. We paid $18,000 for a property at 17 Larch Street, South Caulfield in Melbourne. I saved a couple of $1,000s working part-time, and my parents put in some money as well. And we took a 30-year loan. We had no idea how we were going to pay that off. Just to put it in context, the family car in those days was the Holden Kingswood. That was $2,000. I think it was $12 a week rent, and I was excited. So whether I paid $18,000 or $18,100, oh, by the way, I made a mistake. It went up in value. Interestingly, inflationary times. The Gough Whitlam government came in, Labor government came in, high inflation, the property went up in value. No one told me about all this. Hey, look, the property's gone up. Look how well the rent's gone up. So I borrowed against it to buy the next one. Then I got married, and I sold. Nobody told me that you could refinance, and I'm not sure how easy it would have been in those days. So I sold my share to my parents, half share of $32,000. In the 2000s, Pam, my wife, and I bought it back from my mother, $256,000, built 2 townhouses on it that are probably combined now worth close to $3 million. So my first $18,000 property I still own, even though I had a gap of 15, 20 years in the middle where I didn't. It's worth $3 million. What would have mattered if I paid $1,000 or $500 more in those days?
It's a drop in the ocean, mate. It really puts it into perspective, which I appreciate you sharing that. Because
I guess it's the power of compounding, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And I think most people, as I think Bill Gates said this, most people underestimate what they can do in 10 years and they overestimate what they can do in a year, right? And I think it's because we're ambitious people. We want everything now. We want things to happen quickly. And this is a marathon, not a sprint. And when we try and run it at sprint pace, then we're going to gas out at some point. So considering all of your wealth of experience and knowledge, Michael, through 5 decades of investing and of business, if you had to give one last piece of advice to our listeners who are multi-6-figure and 7-figure business owners who are wanting to create financial freedom faster, and they're nervous about the current environment that we're in because of the sheer amount of uncertainty that exists in our world today, what would your last golden nugget be for those people?
Okay. So for business owners, I believe that your business should give you the cash flow to invest in other assets. And like you, Jackson, I don't believe it should only be real estate. So while my specialty is real estate, if you want to eventually live off at the cash machine of your asset base, you're going to need your own home with no debt eventually. You, I believe, should have a residential real estate portfolio with a limited level of debt when you eventually retire, so that it's at least washing its face. You're almost certainly going to have some super. And I believe you also need some income generating assets, and whether it's shares, managed funds, not Bitcoin. I don't understand enough about it. And then what you've got to do is build that asset base over time. It takes time. And if you think about it, once you retire in the 60s, 70s, you're still going to have 20, 30 years to live. So the assets you should have, in my mind, I'd like you to be able to pass on to future generations. So you should be buying quality assets. So things you buy when you're in your 30s and 40s shouldn't just work this now. Shouldn't be the latest hotspot. It should be something that has always worked and will be in continuous strong demand in the future for you. When you retire in 20 years and 10 years and 15 years, I don't know how long our listeners are going to be before they retire, and then 30 years into their retirement, and then for their kids in the future. So don't buy a 100-year-old dilapidated home, even though that beautiful terrace in the inner suburbs looks really nice. What's going to be in continuous strong demand for how we want to live in residential real estate in the future? Only buy quality assets. Understand the phases. So what you need to do is, first of all, educate yourself. Get a good team of people around you, then go through the asset growth stage of your career first, and then slowly lower your loan to value ratios. So then you can eventually live off your cash machine. And I guess the other little message between those is that residential real estate is a high growth, relatively low yield investment. It's hard to make money out of real estate in the short term, but it's a fantastic way of growing assets over the long term that will eventually be your cash machine. So use your business as the cash machine. But when you look at it used to be the BRW, now it's the Financial Review Rich 500 list, 200 list, you'll see that those who make their money either make it in real estate or they make it in business and invest it in real estate, Jackson.
Sage advice, mate. And I think so many people are looking for the silver bullet. They're looking for the sexy and sophisticated. And these are the tried and true strategies that have worked for decades and decades for the most successful people. And as you said at the very beginning, success leaves clues. Follow the path that has worked, and you're a testament to that, mate. So I appreciate you sharing your wisdom.
Maybe one last little hint. People are playing different games. So don't compare your chapter 35, Jackson, with my chapter 70, because I'm playing a different game. And what's a good investment for me today was not the sort of thing I used to invest in 30 years ago. So therefore, be careful who you're getting advice from too, and make sure that they're playing the same game as you. So a lot of people say, I want to buy commercial real estate because that's what the big boys did. By the way, that was one of my early mistakes in the late 70s, where I got into commercial real estate too early, thinking, hey, that's what the big boys do. And it didn't have the capital growth. And I've made many, many mistakes, more than my share of mistakes. But know what stage of the journey you're at, know what game you're playing, and play the right game.
Amazing, mate. Phenomenal advice. And remember, a good idea in theory remains exactly that, just a good idea until you implement it. So make sure you take some of the pearls of wisdom from this conversation and put them into practice and focus on that progress over perfection. Michael, I appreciate you making the time, mate, and looking forward to catching up again soon. And
it was fun talking, Jackson.
Absolute
My pleasure. Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat with Jackson Milan. It's actually a bit strange, a bit weird for me to listen to other people interviewing me and hearing how I come across. But if you enjoyed it and, well, you want to hear more of this sort of information and you don't currently subscribe to this podcast, hey, just stop for a sec before we go into my mindset message and subscribe or follow this podcast, depending on whatever your podcast player suggests, your podcast app suggests, so that you twice a week get information from my guests. Now, a moment ago we spoke about negotiation, and yeah, that is a critical skill of successful business people and investors, but I think a bigger skill is actually taking action. I was recently asked by somebody, what's the biggest difference between successful investors, those successful people I've been dealing with over the decades, and the average investor. And really, it's their mindset. It's the way they think. It's not the knowledge. Knowledge comes with time as you eventually learn more. You can buy knowledge by employing the right people around you, like the team at Metropole. But it's really their mindset. And I think it's also that they take action. Now, it's interesting at this time because some people have been caught napping while the property markets have been turning and they haven't taken action. All the research houses confirm that property prices are continuing to rise and that the market bottomed earlier this year. So if you haven't done anything about it yet, what are you waiting for? I hope you're not waiting for the market bottom. You've missed it. How long are you prepared to wait to take advantage of this new cycle? Because the opportunity like this to get in at the beginning of a new property cycle doesn't happen very often. Now, I'm not advocating trying to time the market. I don't know your circumstances. I don't know if it's right for you to do anything at all. But why not contact my team at Metropole, metropole.com.au, and have an obligation-free clarity consultation with one of our property strategists to discuss your goals, to see your options. By the way, we're much more than just ordinary buyers agents. We help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through property. Because you've heard me say it often enough on this podcast, we see property investment as a process, not an event. So you can't go out and just buy any property and hope to be successful. That's why negotiation isn't anywhere near as important as formulating a plan, getting the right advice, and getting a good team around you. So we don't have any properties for sale, but we offer strategic advice, and it all starts by putting a strategic plan together for you. Metropole.com.au.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In today's Mindset Moment, I'd like to share a message I learned from one of my mentors, Jim Rohn, who explained, if you can change yourself, you can change your life. What Jim Rohn said is life is about constant, predictable patterns of change, and the only constant factor will be our feelings and our attitudes towards life. He said, we as human beings have the power of attitude, and that attitude determines choices, and the choices determine our results. All that we are and all that we can become has indeed been left up to us to decide and interpret through our attitudes and our choices. Jim Rohn said, life is like the changing seasons. You can't change the seasons, but you can change yourself. So the first major lesson in life is to learn how to handle the winters. They come regularly right after autumn. Some are long, some are short. Some are difficult, some are easy. But they always come right after autumn. And that's never going to change. Jim Rohn said there are all kinds of winters, the winter when you can't figure it out. Jim Rohn said there are all kinds of winters, the winter when you can't figure it out, the winter when everything goes awry. There are economic winters, social winters, and personal winters. Winter times can bring disappointment, and disappointment is common to all of us. So you must learn how to handle winters. You must learn how to handle difficulty, because it always comes after opportunity. That's never going to change. The big question is what to do about winters. Jim Rohn said you can't read January simply by tearing it off the calendar. Of course, he was talking about the American winters there. So he said you can't just tear it out of the calendar, but here's what you can do. You can get stronger. You can get wiser. You can get better. Remember that trio of words. Stronger, wiser, better. The winters won't change, but you can. Before I understood this, I used to wish that it was summer when it was winter. When things were difficult, I wished they were easy. I didn't know any better. But then my mentor gave me the answer as part of his unique philosophy when he said, don't wish it were easier. Wish you were better. Don't wish for fewer problems. Wish for more skills. Don't wish for less challenge. Wish for more wisdom. So the bottom line is, if you can change yourself, you can change your life. Well, thanks for spending the last little while with me, and I hope you got some benefit from this show. If you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there's 3 little buttons down the bottom. Press it and share it, or just tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you'll definitely be doing me a favour and helping me in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, there's ways of catching up with me between these shows. Just look for Michael Yardney on social media, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I have a way of saying thank you to you for subscribing to this podcast. Go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where you can get a bunch of ebooks and reports, my way of saying thank you. And when you've got time, why not listen to some of the old podcasts? There's individual lessons in each of those that I think would be helpful for you. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?